Hello everyone, welcome to It's Biblical. The time is short, I think, and this video is titled 2022 to 2023, and this is a video basically indicating from the Bible and from geopolitical events why I think these are the last 2 years before Jesus returns, and I do believe he is going to return next year in the physical form to enter into the judgment of the nations. And there's only a few things left that have to happen, specifically the Ezekiel 38 and 39 invasion, which I'm going to discuss. But first I'm going to go over kind of the events on this that we're dealing with right now on this board as of today, which is pretty, a third of the way through March right now in 2022. We've already seen a lot of stuff since 2020 kind of spiral out of control around the world, and I believe that all this stuff is culminating for this particular final event, but it's going to be things that are happening all around the world at the same time, and we're all going to experience it very shortly, I believe. And so I'll just kind of get into it now where we're at. So Russia has invaded the Ukraine. Obviously this is not the greatest map. I've kind of kept Europe pretty blank. The borders aren't exactly correct, but I'm just kind of going to deal with the really important nations to the specific prophecies that are in the Bible. And like Ukraine probably doesn't like this is supposed to be Crimea, and this is going to be a long video, obviously. Just trying to put everything out there in a kind of a low quality way so that as things happen you don't lose heart in all the things that you're facing, because you are here for the events that a lot of people say we're not going to be here for. Just to give you the confidence that yes, just endure, But what has happened is Russia has invaded the Ukraine. The Putin, he calls it, they still call it the special operation in Donbass, which is this more Russian ethnic area over here in the east, and it's like Lugansk and I'm not 100% sure the names right now, but there were these two break-off regions that they've been fighting the Ukrainians since 2014 after there was a coup there, apparently sponsored mainly by the West, the American side, the Europeans. And from the Russian point of view, you have the Europeans funneling all sorts of anti-tank weapons, all sorts of crazy weapons in here. Yesterday we just found out, or the day before, that there were biolabs here. And the Russians are saying that biological weapons, similar biolabs that were involved in China, with the Wuhan virus and all that stuff that happened. So I don't think we're the good guys in this. I don't know if Russia really is. War is a pretty horrific thing, but you have to understand their point of view, which is since 2014 there's been apparently 14,000 people who've been killed over here on the Russian side of the Donbass region in the east. There are real Nazis in Ukraine, and there's apparently immense corruption even in the Zelensky regime, and the West is trying to push us to some type of war here, a global thing, because everybody's getting on the anti-Russia train right now. But this is more of like, this is going to happen. I don't think we should be trying to get on any side of this thing as believers, because what is our inheritance? It is going to be this resurrection when Jesus returns. But Russia has come in here, coming out from Crimea, coming from obviously the east. I think there's coming this way as well. The map's not the greatest, but I know they're coming from Belarus towards Kiev, kind of these access points. And it looks like from the demands that the Russians made currently, that their intent may not be at least their initial intent may not be to actually seize the whole country, based on some of the analysis, I guess. But their plan, because they have circled like 60,000 troops of the Ukrainian army here, so they've cut them off here, and I don't know if it's two pockets, but I guess they call them like cauldrons. So you basically cut off the resources, kind of like laying siege to the Ukrainian army here, and they've cut them off here, and it does look like Russia has basically forced the hand here. So, and they could open, I guess, those humanitarian corridors they call them. I guess the real reason they do those is so like people can flee the region, but it's mainly so that regular soldiers can take off the uniforms, pretend to be civilians, and get out of there, so that you lose fighters in the region. So it does seem to be their plan, but they are putting pressure on Kiev and these other regions, and starting to go over here to cut them off from the Black Sea. I guess Odessa. I'm not an expert, but I'm basically trying to give you what the Russian plan seems to be. It seems to be to put pressure on here so they capitulate and say that the Zelensky regime to say that they won't be in NATO or any type of alliance like that, and to cut off the military capabilities from that on all the weapons that have been utilized, obviously to great effect on the Russian military. So you could see how crazy it is to have like this insurgency here, potentially for a long time. Like obviously based off the weapons, it would be hard to hold this. So it does seem like Putin's plan, calling it the special operation in Donbass, still kind of holds true because regardless of what the Western media is saying, even though they are putting pressure on Kiev, and I mean I'm just saying that this is their plan, their first step, right, which is really to have them stay out of NATO, to destroy the armaments that have been built up, and to recognize obviously Crimea, which they took before, and the Donbass region as Russian territory, and to keep this a neutral country. It looks like that's what they're doing, but the reason they're keeping a lot of this stuff happening here, I think personally, is to put pressure this way so that you can't like reinforce this region. But if that, it looks like the West doesn't want that to happen. They want to create a new Afghanistan for the Russians here, based off just like people that are talking, that are involved in this, that have pushed us into various conflicts over time in the West. So I think that this will spiral out of control potentially if the Ukrainians don't give up and give in to the demands of the Russians. In which case it does seem like Russia will push in and start putting more and more pressure until they give up, or to just take out the regime of Zelensky itself. Because there's some analysts that say that they wouldn't really want to go this far west because it would just be a nightmare to actually hold this place because it's more influenced by the West, whereas obviously this region is more influenced by Russia itself. Now, the reason this is significant, I believe that it is pushing us towards the end times on a high level, even though I believe it started really in 2020 with everything, which is kind of hard to deny. Just because you're okay, yeah, we're rolling. Is because this conflict right here, Russia produces a lot of oil for the world, these regions, and a huge percentage of wheat comes from Ukraine and Russia down to these regions, and it's really affecting Egypt because I guess they already have some type of wheat shortage anyways, and they have Al-Sisi here, who I guess is looked at as a pretty decent leader for this country, because I know I've seen him as a Muslim in churches kind of standing strong with the churches that were being persecuted in the ISIS days. I'm not saying he's perfect or nothing, it just seems like he is more of a fair type of leader, even though there was a coup, but the West has been involved in so many coups and evils. We're just trying to look at this as kind of the black and white, what's going to happen thing, because we know what we're to do is to follow Christ, and we can't really control the events that we know are going to happen. But, so that puts pressure on Egypt, right? And the reason Egypt is significant because I believe this is the king of the south in the end times currently. Whereas the king of the north, I believe, is Turkey and not Russia, as they say. Because a lot of people are probably getting excited. I don't mean that like they're happy about it, but they believe that Russia is in league with all these Muslim nations at the end and they come against Israel. But whereas I believe that it's just Turkey as the Ottoman Empire resurgent in league with Iran, and obviously the Middle Eastern nations coming down and trying to seize Israel, probably with help from, we got a big stronghold of militants here now, don't we? Help of this country, Iran and Pakistan, the other ones league together to try to take Israel to fulfill the Islamic calling to take back this region. But it all starts with some type of crisis that leads to Egypt, the king of the south, striking Turkey first. And the way we know that is because in Daniel 11, starting in verse 40, this is the NASB I'm using, it says, "At the time of the end, the king of the south will collide with him," talking about the king of the north, "and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, horsemen, many ships, and he will enter into countries and overflow them and pass through." Okay, so we know he's going to, after Egypt strikes, the king of the north, that's phone. King of the north is going to come down, right, with his ships for sure to come against Egypt, right? But he's going to pass through these nations too, right? Okay. And I think probably these with him. You can see that, right? And some other interesting aspects to get you here. And he will also enter into the beautiful land, I believe Israel at this point, and many countries will fall. Many, right? But those But these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the foremost sons of Ammon, which is Jordan, right? So I should probably take that arrow off there. That Ammon, Edom, that seems to be Jordan, right? So maybe he probably takes Iraq, right? Syria, Lebanon's with him. It does seem like he's going to take out Assad using this as well, because we know that Turkey has pushed down a little bit with their have that region for the refugees that happened in 2019. So Turkey comes down, okay? And he will stretch out his hands against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. So King of the North takes Egypt, but he will gain control over the hidden treasures and gold and silver, over the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. So, Libya will be with Turkey in this, and this Ethiopia is actually northern Sudan, technically, based off where this region was then and is now. It says the old names, but it's still the same area, just we call it Sudan here. Okay, and we know that Turkey, through Erdogan, has a strong alliance here, and he's helping the government here, right? And who is fighting him? Who is fighting this government, right? Egypt is against the current regime here, and I believe Egypt was responsible for that Haftar rebellion that was against the government, and they were sponsoring them. So Egypt is against Turkey currently, geopolitically, through kind of a proxy war in Libya. And essentially Egypt is kind of surrounded. And Egypt has, obviously, that famous Camp David peace accords with Israel. So we know this is true, right? But it says right here, but rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, the king of the north, and he will go forth with great wrath and destroy and annihilate many. And he will pitch his tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. Okay, so he's going to pitch his tents from here, but news is going to trouble him from the north, right? The king of the north is going to be troubled from the north, who is north of the king of the north, obviously Russia, right? So this whole thing seems to be, and who is Russia, and why would Russia fight Turkey over this kind of stuff? Well, Russia has strong ties with Egypt, even though now currently Egypt has said they're against this invasion, but I do believe that there is a strong allegiance. Just look it up. There's been a lot of maneuvers between these two countries with Egypt and Russia, right? And obviously Syria and Russia. So if Turkey came down against Syria after Egypt attacks, then obviously Russia is going to be involved in this because the close allies are being attacked, right? And it does seem that Russia will take this, right? But like I'm saying, 2022 to 2023, this stuff seems to have to happen very fast. But essentially, that's the main thing that has to happen, which is I'll go over again. This is going to be a long video, but it's just for... So something happens here in Ukraine, right? Something happens here, obviously, with the food, the gas prices all around the world is happening. It's leading to a lot of different things, right? Which I do believe the West is kind of wants that to happen, at least the leadership with this whole World Economic Forum. They want to do away with fossil fuel by 2030. They probably want to do a lot of eugenics type stuff through these vaccines and all that stuff. That's a whole other issue, but we'll probably have to get into it just to know exactly where we're at. But essentially, from this breadbasket of the world being cut off potentially to Egypt. Now, I think something's going to happen with Turkey, NATO allied Turkey, getting involved somehow in this conflict and perhaps cutting off this strait right here, the Bosporus Strait, and there's another strait, two straits right here, cutting this strait off, cutting Russia off from this strait, from preventing them from getting food to Egypt and other places in the world. And Egypt may not need to shore up that strait to get food back because of the turmoil that's going to cause here, and that may result in Egypt attacking Turkey to some degree, or maybe Egypt attacks Turkey through their proxy war in Libya. But either way, something's going to happen where Egypt is going to attack Turkey, and that will cause Turkey to come down and use this opportunity to revitalize its Ottoman Empire, to come down through here in this region and through the ships and everything, and probably like this, kind of like it surrounding Egypt, coming up and down, because it's the Ottoman Empire resurgent. And we know for sure in Ezekiel that Libya, and again, it says Ethiopia, but it's actually northern Sudan nowadays, will be with him, but also Iran is with him too. And you can see that they knock out a lot of birds with one stone here, right? And even Ezekiel, it also mentions a few other nations that is actually currently Saudi Arabia judging them. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, are you guys here to take spoil? Are you guys here to, do this kind of stuff? What's your end goal here? And it does seem to be to take Israel finally, which it does seem to happen for a very short period of time. And this results in, for whatever reason, God has promised that he is going to come back here at this time to reveal himself as obviously the God of Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob, the true God, the one who created everything. And it's going to be Christ again coming in the judgment of the nations, resulting in this millennial kingdom, which will come. So that doesn't even really seem far-fetched at this point, and I guess it would seem far-fetched to say that it's going to happen within the next 2 years or however, a year and a half time period, and I think it actually is based off this scenario happening in the West, not really, at least the leaders of the West not really having a good grasp of what to do here, because there's a lot of foolishness now, and their ultimate goal of, they seem to have a religious belief in this fossil fuel reduction and are using this crisis to basically force the populations to get rid of fossil fuels. They talk about electric cars already. It's almost like it's a good thing that's happening, that the gas prices are so high and the food prices are going to go higher, and inflation. Basically everything's going to culminate, and it's already starting. You can basically see that it's just a matter of something resulting in Egypt coming against Turkey and resulting in this whole thing. NATO ally Turkey. So what the heck is the NATO and UN going to do when one of their NATO allies comes against all these nations, comes against Israel? So you can see what's going to happen. But there's other sides to this thing that we have to discuss, because we know there's we know that there's some type of whore of Babylon at the same time as all this, right? And if this is the final beast empire, like final latter end of the beast empire coming down, then that means that the Antichrist has already existed, and that the abomination of desolation has already been set up, and the only thing left to happen is this particular event, along with all the obviously global calamity, the starvation and everything. It's already started with the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. It's just a matter of the specific nations coming down. So I guess I'll just get into a couple things. The Epistle of Barnabas, which I believe is inspired myself. It talks about, and this is just to get how we're in the latter days. So we're in the latter days. So he talks about the 7 millenniums of time, and we happen to be, I believe, in the beginning of the 7th millennium, which is when Christ is going to come back. It's the 7th day, or it's the 3rd millennium of the Christian age, but that's what I'll break down right now. So when Barnabas is talking about the Sabbath, he speaks of the Sabbath, God, at the beginning of creation, and God made in 6 days the works of his hands, and he finished on the 7th day and rested on it and made it holy. Pay attention, children. So what is meant by he finished in 6 days? This means this, that in 6,000 years the Lord will finish everything, for a day with him signifies 1,000 years, just like I believe 2 Peter says that a day to God is like 1,000 years. And he himself testifies to me, saying, Behold, the day of the Lord shall be as 1,000 years. So then, children, 6 days, that is 6,000 years, the whole shall be completed. And he rested on the 7th day. This means upon coming his Son will abolish time of the lawless one, and will judge the ungodly, and will change the sun and the moon and the stars. This he will truly rest on the 7th day. Okay. It also mentions that the 8th day is the beginning of another world. So there's a 7th millennium reign of Christ in the judgment here. So he's saying that there's 6 millenniums, right? And then Christ comes in basically at the 7th millennium. And I think we're technically in the 7th, like 22 years into the 7th millennium. It's probably not exact. And there's another book, Enoch, which the Ethiopian church accepts, and I believe it does give you a pretty clear view of these the 7 millenniums. Okay, the first 6 and then 7 millenniums of what happens in them to basically confirm that this whole paradigm is true. So Enoch began to recount in the books. He said, "I was born the 7th, so the 7th from Adam, which it talks about in the Bible." And it's okay to go to Enoch because Jude quotes directly from this book, and the Ethiopian church uses it as well. So Enoch began to recount from the books and said, I, Enoch, was born the seventh in the first week, while judgment and righteousness still endured. So the first week here, I believe he's talking about the first millennium. So judgment endured, there was no judgment, but this is when creation happened. This is when Adam and Eve existed, and this is when they learned of the knowledge of good and evil in the first millennium, right? And after me there shall arise a second week, which is the second millennium, with great wickedness and deceit shall spring up, and in it there shall be the first end, and in it a man shall be saved. Okay, so the second week is when the flood happened, right? Which is the second millennium. The flood happened, Noah was saved, and this is the first judgment. And within this book, you learn about the Nephilim and all that stuff. There was basically demons came down and taught people how to do abortions. They taught them how to do all these great evil, to the mixing of species, and probably is where we got, I think, the dinosaurs from. If you look at them, is from the wickedness, and it explains how they were all killed at once through the flood, right? So it was experimentation. Basically, everything you see now was happening then. It's just now it's not as... I mean, it was a little different, obviously. You had these great giant creatures at the end, Nephilim, dinosaurs, whatever. Who knows what they even looked like, right? I mean, you have a couple bones, and then the scientist basically says this is what the whole thing looked like. There's probably a lot of deception going on with that. But that's what happened in the second week. Basically, man had to be destroyed because of the evil that the Watchers brought upon the earth. And they were bound, the angels that did that, and they're currently bound, which is talked about in Peter, 2 Peter, and talked about in Jude specifically. And, Moses talks about this in Genesis 6. So that's the first end. Man shall be saved, so Noah was saved and his family, and after it, unrighteousness shall grow up again, obviously. People didn't get any better. And a law shall be made for the sinners. So, after this, you had Abraham and all that whole story, and it eventually led to the 400 years captivity in Egypt, and then eventually Moses and parting of the Red Seas and all this, and a law was made for the sinners. So the actual physical law was created through Moses, the Ten Commandments, everything you already know. And after that, in the third week, at its close, a man... Oops, sorry. So yeah. So we know that that's in the... After that, in the third week, at the close of the third millennium, right? A man shall be elected as the plant of righteous judgment, and his posterity, that is his inheritance, his children, his lineage, shall become a plant of righteousness forevermore. So this is David at the end of the third millennium, being basically the seed of Jesse, where... Christ's, that lineage that Christ is going to be born from, because he's going to rule on David's throne, which is really his throne. And it's a plant of righteousness forevermore. So from his seed is Christ. And after that, in the fourth week, fourth millennium, visions of a holy and righteous shall be seen, and a law for all generations, and an enclosure shall be made for them. So this right here is the prophets. The visions of the holy and righteous, so the prophets in this, and the captivity of Babylon and all that happened here. Obviously, other events historically happen as well. And at the end of this, Jesus is born. But the law for all generations, I believe, is the law of the prophets, and the eternal law, which is love God, love your neighbor, all that stuff. And that's essentially the law is boiled down into that, right? It's not that the law had these various things in them, which Barnabas claims are prophecies. So like all the various laws, if you really dissect them, are prophecies for the future. But that's not what I'm going to get into right now. But they all predicted Christ. He says, the law of Moses basically spoke of me, is what Christ said. But at the end of this, Jesus and even John the Baptist was born, like right at the end of the fourth millennium. And then what does it say? In the fifth week, at its close, the house of glory and dominion shall be built forever. That is, I believe, in the fifth millennium. Obviously, potentially 30 AD, whenever Jesus was crucified, resurrected, and the church, all the new word was given, to be written down and everything in the books in the New Testament, and the other writings that are out there, like Epistle of Barnabas and Shepherd of Hermas and all that. And it was built here. But it says in the sixth week, and after in the sixth week, the sixth millennium, all who have been it shall be blinded, and their hearts of all them shall be godlessly. They'll forsake wisdom, and in it a man shall ascend and as closed the house of dominion, that is, I believe, the church will be burnt with fire, and the whole race of the chosen root shall be dispersed. So the chosen root, the race, I believe, is probably referring to Israel. I'm not sure the timing of this, but it does seem like wisdom was lost here, because what was the falling away, and why did Islam rise, and all this kind of stuff. It does seem like there's something with the church, all the splits, all the making it basically another law unto itself, having to go to man instead of the Word of God, which is Christ, and having to have all these different denominations. Basically, really kicked off in the 6th millennium, if you really think about it. As far as that's when you had the split from the East and Western Church. Then you had Protestantism rise, and just hundreds of different denominations and everything. The Jews were more so scattered, obviously, in this time, and then in this time, at the end, basically, you had them rejoin together, and evil basically became worse. And it says a man will ascend. I think that's talking about Satan more so, ascending, becoming basically the really in his prime, as opposed to being Jesus ascending, because I believe his prophecy is in the 4th and 5th millennium here. And after that, in the 7th week, shall be an apostate generation arise, and many shall be its deeds, and all its deeds shall be apostate. So right now, is it not hard to see that this is the worst generation of all time, potentially, with all the evil, the homosexual, the Sodom, the paganism, and all the cruelty and hatred and criminal activity, and the wars and the rumors of wars, and potentially nuclear conflict, which I think is going to actually happen, which I'll get into. But at its close shall be elected the elect righteous of the eternal plan of righteousness, to receive sevenfold instruction concerning all creation. Now, this election, I believe, is related to the resurrection of the believers. Some will be rise from the dead physically out of the ground and get, with their new bodies like Christ had, because he was the first fruit of the resurrection. And then also, what do we have? The ones who are alive still will be changed in an instant to that resurrected state, and they'll meet Christ in the air when he's coming back. And that they receive their election. We're starting to get all these different books now to have this knowledge, and I believe to enter into the judgment of the nations, but also to rule. The meek inherit the earth over the world in the millennial kingdom, which seems to be different than you think, where it does seem like there are people who are alive in these nations being taught by these risen believers the ways of Christ and the ways of God, and for 1,000 years while the devil is subdued. And then obviously the devil's released again, and those who didn't really latch on to the truth, even though they had Christ and these people, these resurrected beings teaching them, they rejected it again and again, come to try to make war with them. But that's the final judgment, and the devil is finally thrown into the lake of fire, and then there'll be the eighth millennium, and then the judgment of the second resurrection, which is the resurrection of everybody, and the judgment of every man. But that's future, so we're just going to basically keep this to the next event, which is obviously this invasion, all this stuff, and then the resurrection of the believers at the height of the evil in the 7th millennium. So I do believe this is about the 7th millennium, 7 millenniums, so we have that framework right. So another way to look at this, you have 7 millennium of all time, right? It's just here. So 6 are given over to the world and its evil, and right at the beginning of the 7th, it seems like this happens, and then Christ comes to judge the nations who came against Israel, and to probably all the nations that are doing all this evil stuff, like vaccines and all that kind of thing, and basically creating a starvation and trying to wipe out the whole population because they think they're better than the planet, because they have to restart, because they're worried about things like global warming. Because if you worry about like global warming and stuff, then you don't really believe that God created a finite amount of time, that is 6,000 years given over to the men, and then he's going to judge the nations and come in the 7th millennium. If that's true, then that does not necessarily matter. We're supposed to be stewards of land and of each other, but obviously God made a set thing. He created the universe through Jesus Christ, which is the Word of God spoken into being, and there's only a set amount of time, and we happen to be at the end. And the reason I think we can know these things is because we're at the end, and it's from the Father, right? Only the Father knows, and I believe he, through the Holy Spirit, is giving us the revelation through the Word to be able to basically access this information, to warn and say, look, he's coming, this is real, this is how the world works, and everything's going to change really quickly. Things are going to get really, really bad on a physical level, but it was all planned, and it was always going to be this way. And there's a mystery of iniquity where iniquity is allowed to run its course and get to a peak at the end where if he doesn't come, no flesh should be saved, but for the elect's sake, those who he's chose, which does seem to be, there is a remnant in Israel that is saved, because he's going to turn his face back to them, and the time of the Gentiles has ended. And also his elect, his chosen, the believers who believe in him and his truth. And also, if you look at these last three millenniums, they're the last, there could also be looked at the three millenniums of the Christian age. That is 2,000 years given over to man, and they're, to basically hide the truth through the doctrines of men and all this stuff. And then obviously the third one is that the resurrection. So this is not something I need to get into, but I could basically prove all of this stuff just on various different stories in the Bible, because every time you see a third day or a Sabbath, I believe it's referring to this seventh millennium. Because if you think about Jesus, if he's a representation of the Word himself, that he's saying that he dies on the first day and he's resurrected here on the third day. So what he's saying is the resurrection is obviously going to happen on the third millennium of the Christian age, also on the Sabbath, right? Of the that is the Sabbath millennium, which is really the true Sabbath, because he's the Lord of the Sabbath, which is a time of true rest when the world can rest from this horrific evil that we have now, and nobody can deny this horrific evil, which I'll get into. And I'm going to get into it. I might as well get into that right now, because a lot of people, and this is not a judgment, but you can understand why somebody in a fleshly way does not want this to happen, because, say you were born, you're 20 years old, and you're born now when Jesus is about to return and everything's going to get really bad. So it almost seems like, well, what about my future? What about my plans? Well, the future's going to be a lot better off with Jesus running the planet than it is now. Because you have to think about a lot of stuff that's happened since I'll just go from, so you had World War, at the height of all time, right? People kind of ignore this, but you're basically here, like right at the end before the 7th millennium. Within the last 100 years, the worst wars have happened. World War I, World War II, you had the Holocaust, and right before that you had the rise of Darwinism and all these things which led to like communism and these kind of ideologies which have killed hundreds of millions of people, including Nazism and all these things that have happened. You had that rise, and then you had in the West, you have the rise of abortion, right? The legalization in the 70s in the West, mainly beginning at that time. And so that's potentially another over 1 billion children killed, billion children killed in a manufactured system. And then at the same time, you had the sexual revolution in like the 60s, leading to pornography and all the evils that have come from that. Obviously, the pornography, the torture that probably goes along with that around the world, the child abduction, the sexualization of children, the rise of Sodom and that kind of a tradition. You've had the criminal, the serial killers. I saw once, because people always say that media stuff doesn't contribute to this, but with the rise of that, you had the rise of, obviously violence and stuff. It is on the individual to watch a movie and not to enjoy that and to want to, implement that on somebody, say a torture scene or something, but it's not unbelievable that has contributed to people furthering their ability to think that way, because just think about how the peak of evil is more like this, because there's a thing I saw, like a documentary about World War II, like how conflict has decreased since World War II and everything's getting better. But really, if you think about it in God's way with abortion and stuff, and even Enoch talks about abortion being taught by basically demons or fallen angels that came down to confuse men during the first judgment. So if you really think about it, evil is like peak, and right now it's at its height. Abortion's still going on, pornography, and all stuff going on with the elites. If they're really trying to depopulate the world through their various different schemes, and if they think that that's a worthwhile thing, then they've completely lost it. And so essentially, you really need Jesus to come back before we completely wipe ourselves out with nuclear conflict. That I believe is probably actually going to happen, but maybe not exactly how people think it's going to happen. You just have to think all these things, and if you just look at some cartel videos, I mean, I don't recommend it, but the stuff that's been going on in the south of the border, the evil in the torture and the mutilation and the greed and the horrific, the civilians being the casualties there, the West basically becoming tyrannical through these policies over COVID, the starvation being brought upon the world, the additional starvation by the COVID policies. We are at the height of wickedness and evil, and pride and foolishness, because obviously our leaders are making crazy decisions that seem to go completely against reason. Whereas you would think, okay, let's start a pipeline. Let's, we're going to cut off Russia, so we got to start doing fuel. No, there's some other kind of spiritual thing that they're trying to do, because there really is a World Economic Forum at Davos, where all these leaders go to and they talk and they come up with plans, and they really do believe in a net zero emissions by 2030. How do you attain that without hurting people? Obviously, you can't. And if you do believe that it's worthwhile to depopulate the world for this cause, then and everything they've said kind of alludes to that. Like, there does have to be something to decrease. Like, Bill Gates has talked about that. That's going on while all this is going on. And it would, if they want people to be gone, then they probably are okay with some type of nuclear warfare. So men are at the height of their evil, height of their pride, height of greed. The richest men that have ever been in the history of time exist now. And they're not obviously following the Christ. They're not realizing where they're at. They're right here. In their greed and their arrogance, they believe that they can change the world and restart the planet or something. But they don't know that they're right here when everything's going to happen. They are these men that are spoken of in all these prophecies. Now, even further, so we are really in the latter times. The latter times are the 6 millenniums for sure, and then right at the 7th millennium. So we are in the last days. That's why in all the Bible in the New Testament it talks about we're in the latter days. Even them, they're talking about, like Peter's talking about it, that they're in the last days currently when they wrote it at this time. So these are the latter times of the 7 millenniums. So you're right here in the 7th millennium when Jesus is about to return. Anyways, just without even getting into these other numbers that are given to us. I'm just gonna. I know it's in here, and I don't know if it helps you to know, but we'll just start with how these numbers. There's various numbers given in Daniel and then in Revelation that I believe correspond. They say they're days, but I believe the days are representation of years. And now, most people technically believe in that principle when applied to the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel, referring to basically. So right here I have it broken down further, where the 4th. So if you were to take off this part and put it down here, so the 4th millennium, 5th millennium, 6th millennium, and the 7th millennium. I have the day prophecies broken down into years here, but basically they believe the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel is referring to the time when the call to go rebuild the Jewish temple, the second one, went out to when Messiah came, and it's so that's the first 69 weeks, and that is corresponding. They change it to the days to be the weeks to days, and then to years, so they see that as years. But a lot of people believe there's still a week left where there will be the final 7-year tribulation, I believe, or at least the 3.5 years, depending on who you ask, where all this stuff is going to culminate. It's not that they're wrong, it's just that it's probably true, it's just not exactly how they're looking at it, because I do believe Antichrist is already here. It's been for a long time, there's been tribulation for a long time, I won't get into that, but I'll just explain what I think, because there's the sheep and the goat and I'll get it right here. There's a prophecy about the vision of the ram and the goat, and I'm just going to be spoilery. It's in Daniel 8, but there's a ram standing there. He's very strong, but this ram represents the Middle Persian Empire, which it literally says, and then a goat comes with a horn, comes and strikes that ram and destroys it. So it's actually Alexander at the time of when he had his empire. He started in 334 BC. He came and attacked Persian Empire and took over, all the way eventually into India and stuff, and in Israel. He wiped out the Persian Empire, but that horn broke off and split into 4. So we know that the Alexander's empire was split into 4. But in one of the 4, there were 2. One was the king of the south, which is the Potomac region empire, and then you had the Seleucid. And when it talks about the north and the south going at, it's always like this region going at this region, back and forth, in the later Daniel. But it does say out of one of these 4 empires came. That's where I'll say. So out of one of these 4. And I believe it's actually the Seleucid region, there came forth a rather small horn, who grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. It grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. So a lot of people believe this little horn, I do too, is the Antichrist It's also the fourth beast of Daniel. It's also the beast of Revelation. I believe it is actually a beast empire, clearly, because of the four beasts in here. We know it's an empire. But it also is connected with Satan, because it says he grew up the host of heaven and caused some of the hosts of the stars to fall to the earth. So it's Satan and his rebellion causing the angels to come to the earth during his rebellion, which they talk about in Revelation 12. So it's connected to Satan. It's connected to this empire. And he even magnified himself equal to the commander of the host, so as equal to God, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of the transgression of the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one, he said, particular one, who is speaking, how long will this vision about the regular sacrifice apply, while the transgression causes horror? This transgression, I believe, is the abomination of desolation. So it's connected to the regular sacrifice being taken away as well. So as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled. And it says for 2,300 evenings and mornings, so 2,300 days, essentially this vision takes place. And when did the vision start? When Alexander invaded Persia, which is 334 BC, when the goat came against the ram. Destroyed the Persian Empire, and it lasts for 2,300 years. I believe the days are years. And that happens to be, since you go from BC to AD, there's no 0 year, so you would have to minus 1 when you did the calculation. So what is 2,300 years later from 334 BC? Why? It's 1967. So, and the vision talks about within this time what's going to happen. So, obviously within this time, Alexander's going to, the Greek Empire goes against the Medo-Persian Empire, which it literally says, if you just read Daniel 8, that is what that is referring to, like literally says it. And it says, so that's going to happen. He destroys the Persian Empire, but obviously Alexander died on his deathbed, and there was four different empires that always went at it, right? And two of them are one is the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic, right? And okay, at the end of that, in those Seleucid regions, they go back and forth, and I think it starts to get into like Roman times when you get to Daniel 11, where it talks about where the north and the south battling each other. It talks about one who imposes taxes on the Holy Land, and I believe that's Augustine. So it's whoever controls the Seleucid area and whoever controls the Egyptian area. So Augustine, he imposes taxes on the Holy Land, okay, and he's the first Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire really did last longer than people say. Because you had the barbarians and everything come, but it was still the eastern half of the Roman Empire, which is actually ruling, obviously, the Seleucid region into Israel. So Rome really had control of Israel until basically Islam came, and so Islam came, but it's a little different story because it says out of one of these four empires rose the little horn, which I believe is Islam rising in the Seleucid region. Now, this is a long video, obviously. I'm just trying to break it all down. But Islam rose, I believe, in this Seleucid region somewhere. Up here. And not here in Saudi Arabia. Now, I could base this on, there's a lot of different things, but I recommend this thing called Pafander Films. And it's like 2020, they really started hammering the fact that Islam really, there's no evidence of the first four caliphs through like coins or anything. Just to boil it down, one second. What happened based off the historical accounts, because you do have other like historical accounts from Muhammad's up here in Israel battling and killing the Byzantine Empire, so like it's a completely different story from the one that have in Islam or one that's in the Quran. But basically, a man, I think it's like Ibn Qabisi or something, he united the Arabs, the Tayyi, I believe they're called at the time, and basically created some type of empire that kind of came in peacefully, and even some of the Jews kind of like, I think he was kind of giving Messiah-like attributes to himself, because he's going to come and take this land, but obviously he flipped on everyone, and it was the Arabs just taking everything. It was extremely brutal, which is why you could see eventually the story was changed. And it eventually resulted in, well, obviously it eventually became what Islam is today. It didn't seem the start of it, was developed for that, and it became the Umayyad dynasty, right? Which was developed in the north. But what happened was a southern version, the Abbasids, there was a civil war, and the Abbasids eventually took over the regions of the Arab Empire, and they developed over, because the earliest Quran is like 200 years after the the beginning of Islam, so it was developed. It's a lore. Because everybody was probably saying, well, Muhammad said to do this, do that, so they had to kind of boil it down and get it to something that was tangible. And the story was changed to obviously be Mecca, and the whole story of Medina, Mecca, and the prophet who came, as opposed to this whole warrior guy who took over this whole region, and eventually the thing that developed through that. And it was the Abbasid Empire, and there's evidence, there's Chinese documentation where when it was the Umayyad, they said it was the story was more from the north about Muhammad. But then when the Abbasid took over, the story became changed and started becoming from the south. There's actual recordings of it. That's why I recommend Pafander Films. They've been doing this stuff, and really since 2020, really been picking up this northern narrative for various reasons why Islam, there's no way it came from this, originally came from here, whereas the whole story was changed and it was given that. Even if you go in the King of the North and South battle, it does seem like it does kind of talk about that, because we know the King of the North has a god that he honors with precious stones, and he puts himself above every god, even the God of gods. So what happened, what I believe in, the Beast of Revelation was this empire, and eventually the other beast that comes up, which is the false prophet, I believe is Islam itself. You had the beast, which is the empire, and then you have the false prophet, which is the false religion, the false, people that have this false faith that basically tacks it on to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also Ishmael, and creates this false thing. It's basically a stumbling block, kind of a judgment on the church and on Israel. Because it's the fourth beast of Daniel, and it acts as a judgment to, just like the Babylonians were a judgment to get his people to turn back to him. And it lasts. Islam has been around for how long? And it eventually, again, returned to be a northern power through the Ottoman Empire, right? And then in 1923, basically after World War I, after the Armenian genocide, where they killed a bunch of Christians, it was changed into the nation of Turkey. But obviously you have Erdogan who wants to revitalize it. So Islam started in the north, became more of a southern thing, and then eventually became northern again, ruling from the north. And it was basically destroyed, but it's coming back for a very short period of time, apparently, through Erdogan. It seems like when this happens with Egypt, and he uses that to unite the Iran against this to finally take Israel for Islam again and create the Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire, for a brief, very brief stint, I guess, because I think it's going to all boil down to next year. And it happens that 2023 is the 100-year anniversary of the Treaty of Lausanne, which is where Turkey lost its empire, basically, and it was turned into this nation. So I think that we happen to be 100-year anniversary of that next year. I think either this will kick off very soon, and then Turkey is going to do it and into next year and try to revitalize their Ottoman roots. And I don't know what the West is going to be able to do about it, because it does seem like the West is attached to the whore of Babylon, which we'll get into. So we have that. The reason I think it all has to happen within 2,300 years. So, and it culminated in 1967. So obviously Islam had control over the Temple Mount and Israel until 1967, which is when Israel took back the Temple Mount. And that is, to me, that's undeniable proof that somehow Israel still has something to play as far as God turning his face back towards them. And there's the Israel above as well. There's a spiritual nature to that, but there is also the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and him turning his face back towards them. Because you could see why he would come here, because then the whole world would know that that's Jesus was the God who came through the prophecies of the Jewish people and then into the church, and he's the one. And that's why he's hallowed in this judgment on Gog, which is in Ezekiel 38, which is definitely in there. But the 2,300 years where the Temple Mount and the abomination of desolation happened after the splitting of the Greek Empire is fulfilled in 1967, when the Jews do have control over the Temple Mount. Even further in, to even solidify these years, Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, Mark 21, and then in Mark 13, and then Luke 21, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, this is basically a big sign for the end times, then you know that basically the Great Tribulation is going to begin. And I believe, personally, based off the numbers here, that the abomination of desolation was obviously set up by the little horn, right, and the transgression of desolation. So I believe it's the Dome of the Rock sitting on the Temple Mount. Even on the Dome of the Rock it says, "Lo be it for all to have a son." So basically, God cannot have a son is written on that Temple Mount. And when it was created was when Islam was still in its early stage and it was still developing, because there's some conflictions between what the Temple Mount actually says, and that gets into the whole northern narrative because the Umayyad dynasty set that thing up, and it sits there as a monument, as a marker, basically, that the devil is ruling from where God's throne was in the physical sense. Obviously, God is everywhere, and His throne isn't just going to be in some building, but it's just more of a geological feature, and devil kind of mocking God by sitting on the farthest reaches of the north on the temple, the very Temple Mount, where the holy mountain, basically. I mean, it's right there. There's not going to be another rebuilt temple in that sense before Jesus comes back. I don't see it. There will be some future temple. It seems like, I don't know how physical it is, but the one when the bride and the unites, and then you live forever. But He is coming back. But I guess we don't need to get into that. We just need to know that this is really happening, and it's going to happen within the next 2 years. And but the Dome of the Rock was set up, and it says in Revelation 11 that it talks about the outer court be given over to the Gentiles, and they rule it for 42 months. And it is interesting that 42 months, if you break that again down to days and then to years, you get to basically 1,278.3.4 years. And now if you were to say, okay, the Gentiles again are given this Temple Mount because Jesus is talking from His time, so the abomination, He's not starting from this point, Alexander's invasion 2,200 years later. He's starting from after Christ, which is in the 5th millennium, right? After Christ, there will be an abomination of desolation set up, and then it'll be the kind of beginning of this. And Revelation 11 basically says that for 42 months the Gentiles are given this Temple Mount. So 688 AD was when the abomination of desolation began its construction, when it was first being set up. If you go to Wikipedia, that's when they say there's an Islamic scholar that's quoted there that says that this is when it was consecrated. So that's when it was declared holy and it began its construction. It was finished in, I believe, 691, 692, but it was actually began its construction in 688 AD. And 688 AD. So if you go to 1967, I can't really do it forward, but if you just were to minus, if 1967 was when the Jews took back the Temple Mount, you minus 1,278.3, I think 0.3 or 0.4 years, and you get to about it's definitely 688 AD 0.6, so like 688 AD, and like the 8th month or something within there, but it's definitely 688 AD if you backtrack from 1967. So for 42 months, Islam had control over the Temple Mount. The people, in that sense. Obviously, the Ottoman Empire was even more regulated, because it does say the beast in Revelation lasts for 42 months. I'm sure you can go from, that's how long basically Islam had control, or when it started as the Caliph system and everything, and lasted for 42 months. I don't know when it ends and how you can match it up if it's 1923, but that's another 42 months. The separate thing involving the beast, but we know that this is true, right? So if you were to minus 1967, you were minus 1,278.3 years, 0.4, whatever, you would get to 688 AD, which is definitely in relation to the Temple Mount and the Jews taken back in 1967, which is also in relation to 2,300 years. If you were to minus that from 1967, you get to when Alexander when the goat came against the ram in Persia. So that's pretty definite in relation to this, which is why I 100% believe that Israel still has something to play. Because, in Acts, he says, they ask him before Jesus ascends, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? And he says, it's not for you to know times and seasons, because what was the apostles supposed to do? They were to build the church, because they were here, right? They couldn't possibly know 100% because they are not here when they can look at everything in retrospect and see that it was fulfilled. And that's why, in the end, there's these elect, the people that can see it, because they can look back here. It's not like some people, it feels like people say you can't know this because no man knows the day or the hour, but like I said, the Holy Spirit is from the Father, and the Father knows the day or the hour. And I'm not saying like I know the exact day, but it does seem like we can indicate at least a year when he's going to come back, because it's given to the people who are paying attention. Because in Revelation, it talks to one of the churches and he says, "You will not know when." Let me just go there. One of their judgments is that if they don't wise up, basically they won't know when he's coming, and it's to the Sardis. It says, "So remember what you have received and heard, and keep it, and repent. Therefore, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know the hour I will come to you. But you have a few people in Sardis who have not sold their garments, and who will walk with me." Now, garments, it might be related to the word of God itself, and they made themselves white and holy. So whoever overcomes will thus be clothed in white garments, which is at the resurrection, and I will erase his name. I will not erase his name from the book of life. But it does seem here, if you won't wake up, you won't know that he's coming, and it won't come. Because it does seem like people are like, that don't like to hear this kind of stuff. They say, well, maybe it could happen in 20,000 years, maybe it could happen tomorrow, maybe it could happen here. We don't know, when the Bible does clearly give all these different things. We have the 7 millenniums in Barnabas, and thus proven through all the various events, like even the 2,000 pigs story. It's so complex, but I don't need to get into it. But like Peter, like when they're going to sea, the sea is the Christian age, the 2,000 years, right? And once he gets to the other side, he casts out the demons into 2,000 pigs. So like there's 2,000 years of pigs, men and their teachings ruling us. And then when Jesus, on the other side of the sea, casts it out, which is on the other side of the Christian age in the 3rd millennium. But everything basically predicts this. It's all everywhere, and then we definitely have this invasion, right? Because it does say if the false prophet is Islam, if the beast is the Islamic Empire, if the, at least the version of the beast, is the Islamic Empire, and the devil is in control of them. You have in Revelation that at Armageddon, like I saw out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. And they are the spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day. This war that gathers them here. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes, so that he will not walk around naked, and men will not see his shame. We know that this is happening. Clothes might be a reference to the word itself, to being merciful, being walking in Christ. And they gathered them together at the place which is Hebrew called Armageddon. So he's going to gather them. And basically it's kind of like if you were to say like the religion itself says that Israel belongs to them. The empire is saying, yeah, we're going to take it. And the devil's the one orchestrating the whole thing. And he has since the beginning through all the fake prophecies, lying signs of wonders. Islam is a lying sign of wonders. And then you're going to ask yourself, well, how can the false prophet bring down fire from heaven? Does he have to? Obviously, there's a lot of metaphorical language. The false prophet, Islam itself, set up an image, right, which is the Kaaba, the black stone in Saudi Arabia, and everyone around the world bows to that image. So everywhere around the world, at 5 times a day, you bow towards the image. Further in Daniel, it talks about the little horn, the beast that is arrogant, which is, I believe, Islam itself, and the empire through it. It changes times and laws. You have the Sharia law. The whole calendar of Islam is completely different, started at that time, which makes it even more confusing to figure out that that it's on the wrong side of history. So that was the lying sign of wonders that was created to gather the nations eventually at the end to try to come and take this. That's theirs. Obviously Egypt initiates it, but they Ottoman resurgence and Iran use it to come against this region here at the end. And you have, so I'll get back to this, how 1967, but it also says during, after the abomination of desolation, there's the 2 prophets preached for 1,260 years, clothed in sackcloth and ashes. So obviously when Islam set up this 680 AD, there's been so much oppression against the Jews and against Christians in Islam. Various accounts, obviously you can see it just within when somebody starts. You have the jizya tax, like a special tax for the people of the book, but it's still kind of oppressive. Many massacres, the Armenian genocide, Christians battling over the Temple Mount, the Crusades, all this crazy stuff that's happened. But Islam is a persecutor of the Christians and the Jews for sure. Not that other people weren't, obviously, the Nazis, which I think is also fulfilled in this too through at the end here with Darwinism and stuff and all these evolutionary ideas and the eugenics and everything that came in and eventually resulted in the Holocaust of the Jews, which I believe is predicted too, because we know that the Jews were scattered through amongst the nations and they were persecuted in Europe right where they were. I believe it's in Revelation 12 where it talks about the woman and the dragon, and the woman, it's again the same number comes up. The two prophets preach for 1,260 days, which is 1,260 years, clothed in sackcloth, mourning because the abomination is set up and Islam is going to control the region. And then the woman is, she goes into the wilderness, which is, I believe, the world, for 1,260 years to hide from the beast, the empire, while he's doing his thing in Europe. And there is obviously a huge community of Jews in Europe and around the world. 1,260 years, clothed in sackcloth. But at the end of this, the devil releases his flood, which I believe was Nazi Germany, after the woman, but the earth helped the woman. Now, it was a horrible flood. It killed, the number is 6 million. I'm not sure the exact number, but it was obviously a lot. Just look at Babi Yar, look up Auschwitz and all this stuff, what was done. But from that, the nations agreed to give, the people back their land and allow Israel today, 1948, right? And it is interesting that 1,260 years after the Dome of the Rock was set up in 688, you get exactly to 1948 when Israel becomes a nation again. Meaning, I believe, in conjunction with Luke 21, where it talks about, again, the abomination of desolation. It says it a little different in Luke 21 about the abomination. But it talks about the time of the Gentiles. Okay, so I got it right here. Luke 21. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the midst are right. These are the days of vengeance. This is Jesus turning his face from them. But whether there's pregnant babies, so there'll be great wrath on this people for rejecting Christ, obviously. And they'll fall by the edge of sword and will be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So Jerusalem is trampled by the Gentiles, again referencing to Revelation 11, where it talks about them giving the Temple Mount, again kind of referring back to Alexander and all this, the little horn that's going to spring up and do this, create this thing. But the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled, and it does even say in Revelation in 11 again that what is it? Leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it is begiver to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months, which again is attributed to here. 42 months, 1,278 years, 688, still the same. This abomination is significant. So this number again, 1,260 years after 688, it is exactly 1948. This is exactly 1967. This is exactly 1967. Very hard to believe. Now, there's another hard to believe that's not true. And that means, so let me just give it a little bit credence that the Jews still have their place, because people do not like that idea, that mercy that is going to be shown to Israelites who are in unbelief, technically to the Messiah. He's going to come and forgive them. I believe that from what I just reading. I know in Romans 11 it talks about the olive tree. It talks about the two prophets being two olive trees, two lampstands. I believe the two prophets are Israel and the church. Sorry. Because there are two olive trees, one's wild, and the natural olive tree, which is the Jews, and the wild olive tree, obviously, in unbelief, he turned his face from them, the Jews, but at the end, when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, then he's going to turn back to them, obviously here, and forgive them, and then they will no longer be in disbelief. And, I mean, imagine all the stuff he has to tell them about him being the Word of God, and just, it's a lot to say to someone who's been rejecting you for a long time. But he's going to fulfill them. They mourn for the one who pierced, and then the wild olive tree that was grafted in. But he warns here about not boasting against the natural olive tree, or the branches of that. It says, but some of the branches of this tree, they were broken off. So like some of the Jews, they were broken off, and you being a wild olive tree, as a Gentile, were grafted in amongst them and became partaker of them, of the rich root of the olive tree. Do not be arrogant toward the branches, but if you are arrogant, remember that It is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. Do not say that the branches are broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right. They were broken off because of their unbelief, Israel's unbelief, in rejecting the Messiah. But you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, that is Israel, he will not spare you either. Behold, the kindness and severity of God. To those who fall, severity. But to you, God's kindness, if you continue in his kindness, otherwise you will be cut off as well. And they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. All right, if they believe, just like all the the Jews and the Acts and everything. For if you were cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree, they were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree. How much more will these who are the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? But then he says this, for I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Again, the time that Gentiles will end, right? And so all Israel will be saved, just as written. The deliverer will come from Zion and will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. From the standpoint of the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. But from the standpoint of God's choice, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers, and for God's gifts and callings are irrevocable. Okay, so at that time, obviously God had turned his face from the nation Israel, but he said there is some type of restoration coming at the end after the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, after the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. It's not hard to see that has happened. Now, it's not that there won't be judgment on Israel. Obviously, there's a lot of Sodom things going on. They have rejected the Messiah, and he's going to allow this to happen to them. As well, obviously Ottoman Empire is going to come down and be horrific to them, but he's going to fulfill this in a very short period of time by coming down and becoming, turning his face again towards them. So it's not that they're can be completely, without judgment, but he is going to forgive at least the remnant, as far as I can tell. And but you have this time of the Gentiles being fulfilled, obviously after 1948, especially after 1967. Now, in Daniel, another number. We're basically getting to how 2023 is fulfillment. Well, I guess I should. There's other stuff about the sake of the fathers. There's a psalm. It's called the Psalms of Solomon. It's an extra canonical, but I believe it's true. Psalm of Solomon 9. He talks about this again. You're righteous to reprove the sins that they have committed. So he turned his face from Israel, and the judgments were righteous. But he did say. He talk about you remove not thine mercy from us, lest they assail us. For thou didst choose the seed of Abraham before all the nations, and didst thy name upon us, O Lord, and thou wilt not reject us forever. Thou madest a covenant with the fathers concerning us, and we hope with thee. When our soul turneth to thee, thy mercy, the Lord, be upon us, the house of Israel forever. For the sake of the Father. It's everywhere. There's another book that has a ton of this stuff. Is the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, about how Israel again will be redeemed even though they fell into rejection of Christ. It's everywhere. It's just that it happens to be just one place in the book of Romans in the New Testament, so it's allowed people to basically say they're completely cut off forever. There seems to be this physical, because Ezekiel 38 definitely really hints at it, at 39 about Israel coming together, and then this is. So Israel will exist, will come from the nations after the time of desolation, it specifically says. So after the abomination of desolation, they come into their own land, and that's when this happens, this whole invasion of Gog, which is, I believe, Turkey, in conjunction with Iran, Libya, Sudan, and obviously various Islamic alliances that probably are happy to see this happen. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is not involved. Jordan does escape the grasp here, so I don't know if they fight or if they just are neutral in this whole conflict, or if they're a part of it and they don't go on. I'm not sure, because it doesn't seem like Turkey wants to control them in this scenario based off Daniel 11. But that is to say that the Jews still have their place in this, and the timeline is specifically based off them geopolitically, so you know what's going to happen. There's more to that. So people reject it because they say, I don't know how they twist this to say that he's not going to fulfill this at the end. We're here. We're not here anymore. we're not in the time where he's turned his face from them. We're here at the end when all these things are fulfilled. You have literal Israel back when it, according to the abomination desolation timeline, exactly fulfills it. There's another one that people don't like. I still believe it. I can't see a way out of it personally, but is that there's they say that when the time of when I'm not really judging it, but they say okay. So in Daniel 12, they ask when will the end be, and he says many will be purged and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and then the wicked shall understand, just like the world doesn't understand where they're at. But those who have insight will understand. Okay, well, so those of us who can see, they can understand because we believe. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. I still, based off this prophecy of from the 2,300 years, how the little horn takes away the regular sacrifice and sets up the abomination of desolation. I think these are connected events, and I think what that is, by setting this dome of the rock up, you're saying that the crucifixion doesn't matter because, lo, be it for God to have a son, so there is no sacrifice, no atonement for sin. It's completely rejected by setting up that faith. And there's a billion something Muslims, right, and have been for many centuries, so they've been cut off from the knowledge of the truth that their sins are forgiven through Jesus Christ. So he takes away that sin, that sacrifice, and he sets up the abomination of desolation. Okay, so that's what Islam did, and that's what I believe the regular sacrifice is referring to, because I believe the 70-week prophecy talks about Messiah being cut off, but not for himself, obviously through the crucifixion, and he does away with a grain offering sacrifice, and I believe by Jesus coming, he takes away like the need for the animal sacrifice and everything, and becomes the sacrifice, just like it talks about Hebrews 10. So this is Islam coming and taking away the need for Jesus as a sacrifice. But some people they more, it still fulfills the same thing. I think it's credible too that the regular sacrifice was taken out in 603 BC sometime, and 1,290 years later you get to 688. So that's an amazing fulfillment too. I'll give credit to that because I think that that's legitimate too. That there was some taking away of the regular sacrifices at this time. I think it's like Babylon or Persia that took away, and then it fulfills it. But I actually personally believe that these 1,290 years since the abomination of desolation is taken away are set up, and then the daily sacrifice, the need for Jesus, the crucifixion, is taken away because obviously the little horn, the Antichrist system, speaks against the Prince of Princes, right? He speaks against Jesus, So he takes away that, and 1,290 years later is 1978 from the dome when the abomination of desolation is set up, and the regular sacrifice taken away, and it's 1978. Why is that significant? I think it's significant because the Camp David Accords, when the king of the South, Egypt, made a league with Israel, a peace agreement after all the many wars that they had, the Yom Kippur, Six-Day Wars, all these wars they had over Israel. The peace. So Israel has a league with the king of the South, which makes this. I think it's kind of a super sign because the king of the South is the one who initiates this, the coming down of the king of the North, and it's in league with at least Israel at the time. And Al-Sisi, you have these particular leaders, and obviously Saudi Arabia now is kind of more allied to them with Trump and stuff. They had UAE more allied to this region is a little more allied to Israel right now because I believe they are sensing that this is Erdogan and the Ottoman Empire wants to come down, and they're already fighting a proxy war with Iran here. So it does seem like Saudi Arabia is kind of worried about this coming against them. That's why, are you guys just here to collect booty when they come down in the Ezekiel 38 invasion? So kind of judging them for what they're doing. But again, it says, now how you get to 2023, it just says, after it talks about the 1,290 days, it says, how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1,335 days. So 1,335 years after the abomination of desolation is set up, you get to 2023, which is next year. That's why I think all this has to happen within this very brief time, because look what happens. But as for you, talking to Daniel, go your way to the end, and you will enter into rest and rise again at your allotted portion at the end of the age. So he's going to rise again here in 2023, I believe, when the resurrection, which is, they call it the rapture. I think it's just the resurrection. What does the Didache say? The Didache is early church writing, and it just said, what does it say is going to happen? Okay, it talks about the end, the Antichrist and stuff, and this will be. So obviously, at the time of the end, the creation of mankind shall come into a burning ordeal of testing, which I believe we've been in for a few years, and many will be led astray and will be destroyed. But the ones enduring in their faith will be saved by the accursed one himself. So they're saved from the Antichrist, from all the evil on the earth, and then the signs of truth shall appear. This is at the end of the Didache. First, the sign of the opening of heaven, then the sign of the sound of the trumpet, and the third sign, the resurrection of the dead. Okay, we know that when the last trumpet blares, will be the resurrection of the dead, which is to change it into that more spiritual form, gathering the elect. Now, not all of the dead, but as it was said, the Lord shall come, and all his holy ones with him. Then the world will see the Lord coming on the clouds of heaven. So we know that that is the resurrection, where we unite with Jesus to come down for the meek inheriting the earth. That's where we meet him in the air. How that works, some are resurrected from the dead, like Daniel, and all the apostles and everything. And then we who are here and remain, who believe these things, will be changed in an instant, meet them in the air, and come back to judge the nations and set up the millennial kingdom. Now, why does it say it's not the resurrection of all the dead? Because it's called in Revelation the first resurrection. Blessed is he who is part of the first resurrection. The second death will have no power over him. And the second resurrection is later, after all this, the judgment of all the dead who have died in the history of time. But you want to be a part of this first resurrection. Mercy, you want to be following Christ because he's coming back. You know that he created this. There's no getting around it. This is it. He's coming back. Probably, I think it's next year based off this timeline, because you got 688 fulfilling 1948, 1967, 1978. If you accept that, if you don't, I can understand why you accept the backtrack of the 1,290 years. Seems to fulfill it, but the king of the south made a league with Egypt, with Israel. So if all these numbers correspond to years somehow, exact years, and then you come to this year and that is there, I don't see how it can't be that Jesus is coming back then. And like I said, the Father reveals it, probably through the Holy Spirit. Obviously, I don't know the particular day or the hour, but some people say that is a play on the Feast of Trumpets, because the Feast of Trumpets is like in September around this time, but you don't really know because it's based off a new moon, I believe. I'm not sure, somebody else probably knows better, but it's based off when a certain moon happens, and then you have the Feast of Trumpets, trumpet being connected to the last trumpet blast. It might be like a September of that year. I don't know, it might be sooner if all this starts really kicking off. Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's true next year. Right at the 7th millennium, 2023, so that means that 2023, you're going to see immense suffering, obviously, wars. And there's another thing we have to talk about, which is what is Mystery Babylon? I believe it's the cities of the earth that, because in Revelation 11, let me get into that. It talks about the two prophets again, who we believe are the church in Israel, who are literal Israel's around today. And you also have the church, the people who believe. It says, okay. When they have finished their testimony, these prophets, so that's probably after the time of the Gentiles, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. Now this beast that comes up out of the abyss, I believe, is different than the beast of Revelation connected to 666 and everything, and the false prophet, because he's the one who comes out of the abyss. This is specifically the one that the whore of the Babylon rides, so I believe this is related to this beast at the end, this really quick revitalization of the Ottoman Empire in league with Iran and all these nations to come against Israel. In conjunction with, in Daniel, I believe it's 2, where it talks about the different irons, the different metals representing the different kingdoms, and the fourth one is iron, which I believe is Islam. And then you have the final one, which I believe is this final Islamic Empire revitalization, is partly iron and partly clay. It's iron and clay, and that doesn't agree with each other, but it basically accomplishes the same goal. And I think it's not that it's this league, it's that the iron is going on of Islam, and as well as the clay of the West the soft tyranny with the Sodom, and the evil, the hidden persecution with the infusion, the shot, with all the tyranny, the soft tyranny going on. That's becoming a hard tyranny, and basically the false religious systems, the people, just the churches and everything, kind of teaching false doctrines and all these kind of things happening. They don't, but you never really hear that whole that Babylon thing really disagreeing with Islam. I mean, fundamentally they disagree, but they're accomplishing the devil's goal, right? So it's the whore of Babylon is all the cities of the earth promoting sodomy, promoting all this stuff. The arrogance of the West. Babylon says, I sit as a queen, nobody sees me. And the reason it's not just one city, because it says, right, okay, let me get into it a little bit. Okay, after they finish the testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them, overcome them, and kill them. So obviously Islam is getting ready to do its thing, and it's making war with Jews and Christians. And obviously the West, the whore of Babylon's, that whole thing is making war with all the people who believe in truth through obviously shutting people down in the media, through their pagan, the pornography, abortion, all this stuff, and overcome to kill them. And their dead bodies, which I believe is their physical bodies, will lie in the streets of the great city, which is mystically called Sodom, Egypt, and where their Lord was crucified. So I believe, since it's a great city, that's what the whore of Babylon is. It's referring to all the cities of the earth that are doing this. And they're linked to Sodom, which is obviously the sexual immorality, and then Egypt, which is obviously paganism and probably likely oppression, which is obviously starting. You saw Canada. And then where also the Lord is crucified, so potentially, obviously, literal Jerusalem as well. But I think this means, because in Hebrews 13 it says Jesus was persecuted outside the gates as a criminal. So wherever there's Sodom in Egypt, you're probably going to lead to you being persecuted as a criminal outside the gates. Basically, we have no continual city, so it's time to get out of these cities. It seems like those from the people, the tribes, and the tongues, nations will look to their dead bodies for 3.5 days, and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid into a tomb. Now, I believe it's dead bodies might just not be allowed their physical bodies to be laid into a tomb, not allow them to rest, not allow them to go to church. And it says for 3.5 days. Now, I think this is 3.5 years. And I believe this began either at the end of 2019 or in 2020 with the whole coronavirus thing. With the creation, obviously this thing was created. Now it's starting to come out that it was created in a lab, probably purposely released, it seems like, to bring the world towards this more, World Economic Forum, try to get away from fossil fuel, because they are really trying to get away from that now using this war. And they're trying, making it more oppressive and controlled system without free thought. And that really kicked off in 2020 with the lockdowns. Obviously, it made it harder to go to church for people, and people are going to church less. And, it kind of made people kind of stay to their own. Their physical, I think dead bodies reference the physical bodies. And they're not allowed to lay in the tomb. Not allowed to rest, not allowed to probably gather. And I think there might be more to that, but that's kind of how I'm seeing it. And it's 3.5 years, so that probably began in 2020, 2021, 2022, half of 2023, maybe. So I think that's also fulfilled here, because what happens right after the 3.5 they're dead for 3.5 days. Those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, celebrate and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So when this happens, some people will cheer for Israel being destroyed in these regions, because it's tormented the earth in a sense by existing and judging through its law, but also through it kind of being a black eye into the face of Islam. And then also the other prophet is the church, the Christians, the world mocks, and the judgments that are basically proclaimed through Christianity, through the word, and those who believe it. And as they're persecuted, you could see that people, even it seems like truth in any form is being persecuted. So even people who don't believe in this timeline and this truth are sensing that they're going to be persecuted too, just for speaking truth, and that's kind of not sounding right. So hopefully they too come to the knowledge that, look, you're just in this timeline. Jesus is coming back. You were created by Him. He loves you. It's time to accept that the sins are forgiven through the cross, and He created this. He's the Word. There's probably a lot more that He can explain to us to expand our minds to how it all works, and He's going to come back very soon. And it's the reason everything stopped not making sense is because we're right here. So after the 3.5 days, after 3.5 years, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, And great fear fell upon those watching them, and they heard a loud voice saying, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven with the cloud, and their enemies watched them. So remember how Zedekiah talked about the cloud coming, even with Christ, which is talked about in Jude and Enoch, 10,000s of his holy ones with him. So this right here is just the resurrection of the dead again. They gather to him. He says, "Come up here." And it says, in that hour there was a great earthquake, and a tenth of the city fell. To the great city. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to God of heaven. So I think 7,000 here is connected to the 7,000 millennium. I'm not 100%, but I do think some of these multitudes, like there's a 3,000 multitude that were saved in Acts. There's the 4,000 with the fish, the loaves, the bread, the 5,000. I don't need to get into it, but I think it's connecting it to that. Not that it's just 7,000 people were killed. It seems like obviously a lot more, but it's that the earthquake happens, not just the physical earthquake, but the shock of Jesus coming back and 10,000 with him, and all this stuff that's going to happen. Now, the Whore of Babylon. So the last 3.5 years, I believe it began in 2020 or at the end of 2019, and it was leading up to through the release of that virus, and then all the stuff that's happening in the world because of it. And then obviously people are trying to use this Ukrainian crisis to take away even more things that are, it's just right along with this whole Great Reset, World Economic Forum, that the arrogant people, the rich of the world in the West, through their ideas, through their Darwinism, that is, and all their eugenic ideas and their belief that humans who are made in the image of God deserve, to be destroyed and in favor. It's clearly just demonic ideas, right? If they don't outright believe that they're being ran by demons, it seems like they are true believers of that. So while that whole thing's happening in the West, causing starvation already through the lockdowns and the oppression with that, trying to create a global tyrannical system where everybody's controlled, but we're controlled by all this stuff together. I mean, in the end, it's not, but, like you got the, all this stuff, the pornography, so if the Whore of Babylon is linked to Sodom and Egypt, to paganism, oppression, and to sexual immorality, you have all the transgender movement and everything. Even Enoch talks about at the end, transgender, like that stuff being, where does it say? Okay. He talks in chapter 98 of the Arch Charles version. Now I swear to you, to the wise and to the foolish, for ye shall be manifold. This is talking about the end. Manifold experiences on the earth. For ye shall put on adornments, more adornments than a woman in colored garments, more than a virgin in royalty and in grandeur and power, and in silver and in gold and in purple and in splendor, and in food they shall be poured out like water. Therefore they shall be wanting in doctrine and wisdom, and they shall perish thereby with their possessions, and with all their glory and their splendor, and the shame, and in slaughter and in great destitution. Their spirits shall be cast into the furnace of fire. I have sworn unto you, ye sinners, as a mountain has not become a slave, and a hill does not become a handmaid of a woman, even so sin has not been sent upon the earth, but man of himself has created it. And under the great curse shall they fall who commit it. And barrenness has not been given to the woman, but on account of the deeds of her own hands she dies without children. So, this is... So from henceforth you know that all your oppression wherein you oppress is written down every day till the day of your great judgment. Okay, it's talking about wickedness here, but it does seem to be, on a physical sense, connecting it to men, dressing as more, elegant than the women at the end, and then also that the women, she'll be barren because of her own hand. Obviously, this whole book talks about abortion and stuff. In chapter 69. An angel specifically taught them how to destroy the embryo in the womb. These books that we don't have, Epistle of Barnabas, the Didache, even there's one like Apocalypse of Peter that specifically talk about abortion. I don't think it was wise to get rid of these books. Obviously, it was meant to, in time, because so evil could run its course, so that it could be like this at the end when God will judge. But it's not good to reject those because it's specifically against it at the end. And you have these pictures in Enoch of what the end is like, and it's connected to exactly what we're seeing: men dressing as women, all these things, and in power, and all this debauchery and pretty much pedophilia. I'm sure there's truth to a lot of the sexual sex slavery, the abortions, the pornography, the probably torture videos, all this kind of evil stuff, the cartels. Just we are at the height of wickedness for sure, and it culminates in this whore of Babylon. It's really arrogant of the West how they're talking about Russia like we're the good, we're good. We can have all these biolabs in here, whatever they're doing. There's probably people in the West connected to the biolabs in China that released this thing for their whole, their Great Reset purposes. Since this whole war is proving that they don't care about their own people in America, those who are in charge, they're wanting in wisdom, like he was talking about there in Enoch. So they're willing to sacrifice everything for a cause that is not even what their people want. It's a cause of freedom from, they're talking about buying electric cars and all this stuff. So the West is being arrogant, and the whore of Babylon says, "I sit as queen and nobody sees me." But it says, I think it's in Isaiah where it talks about the judgment on Babylon, the wilderness, the city, the wilderness by the sea. And I think what it is because it's Egypt, right? It's paganism, false religion. It's also oppression, probably attached to Egypt, and it's sexual immorality, and it's the great city. And in Genesis, when it talks about the great city, it talks about a bunch of different cities in relation to, I believe it's Nimrod, who's in control of these great cities. But it says it's the great city, all these cities together. So it's a lot of cities of the earth, it seems like. And it says in one day all that splendor goes away like that, and it's a burning fire that can't be quenched. And I don't remember where it is, but I know it's in Isaiah. It says she's destroyed by the Medes, the Iranians, in one day. It seems like the cities of the earth, because Mecca is obviously, Iran has its holy cities more so in Iraq, based off the whole Sunni Shia is a more Sunni split. It does seem possible that Iran, through its nuclear thing that's clearly being broadcast because the West messed that up too. Iran is, if they haven't already been building nuclear weapons, will unleash a nuclear storm, maybe in conjunction with Turkey, against the cities of the earth. Mecca for sure, because that's the pagan, Egypt. Probably a lot of European countries that are promoting Sodom, a lot of the Western countries. I don't know if Russia takes part in that. The nuclear exchange, that it does seem like it's going to happen. I'm talking like within 2 years here, 1.5 years or whatever, into 2023, and in an instant, all the earth like all the stuff that people are putting their trust in, the wealth of the world, the possessions, it's going to vanish with the destruction of all those cities. You're just going to have the word of God at that point. And it's going to be basically, it's a horrific event, but it seems to be a warning to get out of the cities, because it says the bridegroom will no longer be seen within you. And it does seem to give an attribute to the Medes, the Iranians, like Medes, like Medo-Persia. This is where Iran is today, and it's no doubt that they will eventually use those weapons. But there's a risk of nuclear conflict here if this excels. So it's not that there might be nuclear exchanges involved in this, but it does seem like that might not actually happen, because we have to have something trouble Turkey from the north, right? So Russia will probably, I don't want to say for sure how this can happen. It seems like the West wants to accelerate this. So what might happen is like Turkey gets really involved in something here. It seems like there's a risk of, they talk about, the West is building up this biolab situation. They say Russia may use this biolab to release, kind of like the false flags in Syria, to release like some bioweapon, which could result, this is kind of what I was thinking, was like they could result, say like Russia releases, they're going to say, blame it on Russia and say they release like a virus, and it's Russia's fault, so they could put it on Russia, but they release a more horrific version of the virus, because obviously it came from China, but who knows, if there's biolabs all over the world, you can release this stuff all over the world. And they might blame it on Russia and allow that to happen, and then Turkey gets involved, right, and starts that war with Russia, kind of begins, and maybe it seems like Turkey's winning this war, but it's cutting off the food supply to Egypt, and then Egypt has to respond because of the food supply and all the various things, being Russia's ally, and they're like, we can't let our people starve, so they did an attack maybe for the Bosporus Strait or something to kind of shore up a possibility of this happening. And then Turkey comes down, boom, with its armies here, and they've already had a plan, probably with Iran, boom, to do this. And maybe Iran and Turkey in conjunction launch some type of nuclear strike on all these cities. Makes it really possible because you're going to have a NATO ally doing this kind of stuff. And it's going to take Egypt, it's going to take the Holy Land. But news is going to trouble, just like Daniel 11 says, from the north. So it seems like Russia will still be in possession of the north, the Black Sea, the war. Trouble from the north to fight its historical ally, Russia, coming from this, coming against them. And then, but it also says from the east, so is China going to get involved? Heading this way. And is China involved in the nuclear exchange too with the West? I don't know. But it does seem like this is going to boil pretty quick. And somehow Turkey's going to get majorly involved in this and cutting off the food supply potentially. And Egypt's going to have to get involved trying to shore up that strait. I don't know if 100%. I don't want to speculate. Obviously I'm speculating, but it seems like this Black Sea conflict is going to spiral out of control. And this is going to happen. And the West is going to be kind of caught off guard when Iran... It does seem like Iran is involved with nuclear exchange on the cities. If not other nations, somehow Beads is like a spiritual reference. And it's just nuclear exchanges between all these different nations. But like I said, it started in 2020, maybe end of 2019, ends in 2023. Dome of the Rock is the abomination of desolation set up by Islam. The Antichrist system, it's a spirit. And the reason why Gog can, it says in Ezekiel 30 that Gog and Magog, prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, in conjunction with Gomer and Beth Togarmah, which is all Turkish, in conjunction with Put, which is Iran, in conjunction with Libya, and then it says Ethiopia, but Northern Sudan, come against this this thing. It's Ezekiel 38, but it says Gog. So I've spoken of you from the beginning. So sometimes it's probably referred to as the Assyrian, because Micah has the prophecy of Christ coming on a donkey, riding literally on a donkey. But then the next thing is like when the Assyrian comes into our land, then I'll rise up different shepherds and I'll waste the land of Assyria. So he can be the Assyrian because he controls this. He could be Pharaoh because he controls Egypt. He's obviously Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, because he controls Turkey. He's in a league with Iran. And the reason he can be that is because Islam, Antichrist is a spirit. Like, there's many Antichrists. It's whoever denies the Father and the Son, right? And rejects that, and which Islam is the super hybrid of that, obviously. Even atheism in of itself is Antichrist, and like China is technically an Antichrist empire in of itself because of the rejection of Christ. But the big daddy Antichrist, the big... little horn, the fourth beast of Daniel, the iron part of the statue in Daniel, the little horn, if I already said that, the beast of Revelation 13 was Islam. It's an empire, it's a religion, and it's controlled by various different caliphs and different people over time. And at the end, he can be Gog because he is technically in charge of he's the last ruler he's the Assyrian, the guy who does this last move, which is probably Erdogan, this last move, and that's why he's spiritually the successor to the Antichrist kingdom, and he's the one who does this. It's not that he's the Antichrist guy, he's the guy in charge of the Antichrist kingdom system at the end that does this. That's where Christ comes back, hallowing his name, and all the nations see him, every eye shall see him coming back to enter into judgment. He, in Isaiah 19, it says he comes to Egypt and frees his people here. We have a big church in Egypt that's going to be suffering under this, crying out for Christ here. The Orthodox Church there in that region, the big church that's been persecuted since ISIS and all this stuff. And it's very possible because allegiances are already here. Russia allied with Syria heavily. Russia's very big ally with Egypt. Russia and Egypt are kind of in league against the government set up here. They were funding Haftar and everything, weapons and all kinds of stuff. It's either going to be it does seem to me that this is going to spiral and make Egypt have to do something to shore up its food supply, and then this is going to happen. This kind of, it's flanked bit like this from the north, and all this stuff's happened. Obviously, in Ezekiel 3, it says, Saudi Arabia's like, what are you guys doing? The Duma, Didan, all these, like, why are you doing this? What are you guys just going to get plunder? But Iran probably strikes them with the nukes, and then somehow there's either a nuclear exchange between them, or something on the mystery Babylon falls by an unquenchable fire in one day, in 1 hour, because there's some type of nuclear exchange that happens. I don't know if it happens before this or in conjunction with all this happening at the same time. Then God just has to come, but it says, "Fallen is Babylon, mother of all harlots, who all the rich men, the mighty men of the earth," which isn't just related to this. It's the rich men, mighty men doing all their eugenics the eugenics, the abortion, the pornography, the oppression, the evil, the everything being driven out by the Western nations, by all the nations of the world that are promoting all this stuff that God has to judge. He's going to let it. I think it's a nuclear exchange that ends all these cities. I'm talking from now until sometime in the next year that all this is going to happen. And it's not hard to believe with all the different things that I hopefully have been able to articulate. 7th millennium, 2023. I can't argue with any of these numbers. I don't know if there's any other way to do this. But it's the fact that you're not waiting for some Antichrist man to rise up from Europe in the revitalized Roman Empire. It's that the West, the people who have been preaching us, have skipped the power of the Islamic Empire. Because Islam, it mentions that beast, right? It has like a mouth of a lion. It's part lion, part leopard, part bear. The first 4 beasts of Daniel in is it 4? I'm not sure. I can't remember. I could look at it, but I'm just trying to make this go. There's it's like one's Persia's the bear, Greece is the leopard, and before that was Babylon, which was the lion, I think. I think I had that right. Or is so you got lion. So so basically this final beast is controlled, has all those elements. So it takes over the same region. It takes over Persia. It takes over the Babylonian regions. So Islam did actually, as an empire, early on had Persian regions. It had the Greek regions, and it had the Babylonian regions, right? So it's the only empire that had everything. Alexander had this, but he didn't have all this at one point. But then obviously it lost it, and now it's going to try to get it back at the end. Because it talks about that beast, that same beast is mortally wounded, but the earth, the men are like, when it comes back, they cheer because the empire, the beast that was wounded, is healed, right? Even further, in Revelation 17, the whore of Babylon, which I believe is the Western powers, the nations with all these cities, it's the cities of the earth that give power to the beast. It's in NATO. Potentially, and they're obviously giving power to Iran. They're kind of begging for Iranian oil right now because they're trying to cut off Orthodox Christian Russian Orthodox Christian Russia, because of this event, because of their boasting and their arrogance, not remembering Donbass, not remembering the people that suffered there. Obviously, there's some arrogance in Russia. People think they're trying to reclaim this. I don't really think so. I think they really are trying to just play their hand by keeping the forces quenched up here, like held up here, while they encircled the main army over here to take Donbass, to recognize Crimea, to keep this nation out of NATO, and to keep it out of any allegiances, and basically have a neutral thing so the West doesn't make all these biolab things and then build up a whole Afghanistan basically proxy war thing here. But it's probably too late. They probably fell for a trap laid by the West. It does seem like they might be blamed for some type of biolab leak, and if that spreads to the earth, it's it. This is it. We're not in the hands of any good leaders. There's a lot of arrogance. So I'm not sure exactly where I was heading right there, but we are definitely in the beginning stages of this, and it's not hard to see it happening within this very short time frame. People are talking about, like I said, revitalized Roman Empire. They forgot about the Islamic Empire already fulfilling all this. with the Islam faith that exists, the setting up of the black stone, which is the image that speaks 5 times a day. You hear the Islamic call to prayer all around the world. Muslims everywhere are pointing towards the image, which is a black stone. It's such a weird pagan element to be inside of a Abrahamic religion. Why is this so significant? You know, like it's half pagan, it's half, you know, it's borrowing from elements of Islam and Judaism and Christianity. I think it's it. There's not going to be some guy who unites the whole world under one banner. Islam could already claim the fact that it ruled the whole, you know, like it ruled over the whole earth, the whole known world at one point. And, you know, and then the final beast, like I said, is partly iron and partly clay. So the Western powers are going to be persecuting people through their paganism. Like, you know, it's not hard to see that, you know, the religion of India, China, you know, it's all Antichrist. The devil is in control of all this stuff. It's just that this is the final one, and the specific beast, because it's also, Islam was also used to judge his people. You know, it's he used it. You know, he allowed it to spring forth to fulfill his purposes, but he's going to flip it back on all these pagan systems in the end. In the West, and its boasting arrogance, I think, is the Whore of Babylon being judged by the destruction of its cities and its horrific prostitution and everything. And it, you know, Whore of Babylon is probably related to the religions of the world too, even to the, you know, the Christian faiths that really are judgmental and keeping people back from the spiritual knowledge of who Jesus is as the Word. But this is more just the physical, how this is going to play out. But it's going to result, you know, there's probably going to be a lot of persecution we're going to have to endure and watch all these things. And but, you know, he's coming back and he's going to restore things as they should be. Literal Israel is going to have a tough time, but they will be forgiven. And it's probably best now to realize that Jesus really was who he said he was, and he's coming back, so that when this starts happening, we can, you know, hope for, you know, he can hope for the resurrection that's coming. And then in Enoch it talks about, I think Wisdom of Solomon has a pretty good breakdown too of what the men are like in the end. You know, kind of they're basically saying there is no God. You know, our stuff isn't written down, so we can get away with whatever we want. Kind of like the arrogance of like this whole Davos World Economic Forum, thinking they can perform eugenics on the planet and keep people, you know, like starve people out through their lockdowns and starve people out through their wars, throughout, you know, like they're going to make everyone's going to be poor in this time period too, the next year and a half. Obviously, all the prices of food are skyrocketing. All the prices, you know, like gold is kind of getting more value, but the dollar's probably going to crash. You're going to have immense economic crash pretty soon, and it's all based off the arrogance of the powers thinking that this is good, so that they can, for whatever reason, cleanse the planet from, seems like human life, fossil fuels, and anything that makes life a little more tolerable. And they're going to try to use all these crises to make this happen. It does seem like there's some truth to all those conspiracy theories about wanting to get the world down to a population of something like a couple 100 million. And you could see why cartels, evil crime, horrific pornographies, child sex slavery, all the abuse to children, the rise of narcissism, which is just, you know, basically persecution in somebody's own household all over the world. 2 Timothy talks about what people will be like at the end: boasters, arrogant, proud, haughty, you know, like not listening to the truth, having a form of godliness but denying its power, saying, you know, I'm this, I believe, but I don't believe this enough to have mercy on my family, on people around me. Everything, you know, Islam is basically going to revitalize. It's already ran its course. You had the Holocaust, which brought about the nation of Israel. And what's like 75 years is like some generation, 1948 plus 75 years, 2023. The pestilence, the man-made allowed diseases, resulting in the lockdowns, the additional starvation. It's all end times. It's all here. It's just that people are missing the fact they still have that left behind mentality. They think that it hasn't been fulfilled. They think the Antichrist is a particular man as opposed to the spirit that rules in many different forms, but is also definitely specifically related to Islam and the false prophet. If the prophet, two good prophets are in Revelation 11 are Israel and the church, then it's likely that the false prophet would be a false super church thing, a false religion, right? That is not really a part of these two. So it have to be something like Islam. It's the only one that fits. Unless, yeah, that's it. And then at the end, the men in the West, through the arrogance of the whore of Babylon, doing all their stuff, like I was just talking about. But it talks about how it's going to be for us in obviously the Wisdom of Solomon. How they saw that they killed they even when they killed the believer, he said, God is my Father. So it's a prophecy of Christ as well, but he's also a prophecy of us at the end, who are going to be at the resurrection. They're going to say, God is my Father, and then they're going to, when they kill him, they're like, oh yeah, he died just like us. He was crying, he was being tortured. It didn't seem like God didn't do anything for him, but in their arrogance, they're going to see the resurrection, right? Like, oh no, everything he said was true. And what have I been doing? I've been performing eugenics. I've been rich. I've been lording over the poor. I've been, causing a world, like causing all these coups and, all these wealthy people, that the arrogance, because they think that there's going to be another 20 million years or whatever, when there's only going to be another year and a half before Jesus comes to judge them. And when they see the resurrection of those believers, the people who are telling them these things, they're going to be pretty scared. And then when they see Jesus coming back to Israel, especially the Islamic nations that are going to be there, they're going to see this, and they're going to be attacked by his armies and everything, and he's going to enter into the judgment of them, thus beginning the millennial reign. It's going to be very scary for them. But for now, it seems like they're going to be winning, right? And I believe there's a lot of it in Enoch, which is, I believe, an inspired work. In chapter 103, it kind of talks about what it's going to be like for us, kind of from our point of view. Say not in regard to the righteous and the good who are in life. In our troubled days, we have toiled laboriously and experienced every trouble, and met with much evil, and been consumed, and have become few, and our spirits small. And we have been destroyed, and have not found anyone to help us, even with a word. We have been tortured and destroyed, and not hoped to see life from day to day. We hoped to be the head, but have become the tail. We have toiled laboriously, and had no satisfaction in our toil. And we have become food for the sinners, the unrighteous. And they have laid their yoke heavy upon us. Forever, since Christ, there's been persecution since the Dome of the Rock, even since the Holocaust. And into now it's accelerating all over the world. And they have had dominion over us, the worldly, and that hated, they have had dominion over us that hated us and smote us. The ones who hated us and smote us, the persecutors, have had dominion. Islam, all the Chinese, like just the horrific communism. And to those who hated us, we have bowed our necks, but they pitied us not. We submitted, but they pitied, they didn't pity us. Even the people of peace, just because they believed in Christ and that the world was created as it is created through him. We desired to get away from them, that we might escape and be at rest, but found no place whereupon we should flee and be safe from them. Everywhere. And we complained to our rulers in our tribulation, and cried out against those who devoured us, but they did not attend to our cities, or to our cries, and would not hearken to our voice. So the rulers of the world, the rich and stuff, this eugenic stuff, the rulers didn't help them. They took part in it, and they're allowing all this stuff to happen. They're not pitying the people who want freedom. They're not pitying the people who want truth, because they think it's their time to perform this horrific eugenic system, and the Islamic think it's their time too, and the communists think it's their time, and the people in the West who are basically attributed to all these horrific things, eugenics, abortion, and all this stuff, think it's their time too. And they helped those who robbed us and devoured us, and they made us few. So the world leaders help the rich and those who devour, they give power to the beast, the Antichrist system, the Ottoman Empire, and they allow it to happen. And they concealed their oppression. They concealed their eugenist program. They concealed everything they were doing. They hid it. They made sure that it seemed like it was our fault for even thinking it. And they did not remove the yoke of those who devoured us and dispersed us and murdered us, and they concealed their murder and remembered not that they lifted up their hand against us. I swear unto you that in heaven the angels remember you for good before the glory of the Great One, and your names are written before the glory of the Great One. Be hopeful, for aforetime ye were put to shame through ill and affliction, but now ye shall shine as lights of heaven in the resurrection, right? Ye shall shine, and ye shall be seen, and the portals of heaven shall be opened up to you. And in your cry for judgment, and it shall appear to you, and all your tribulations shall be visited upon the rulers, and upon those who helped those who plundered you. Be helpful, and cast not away your hopes, for ye shall have great joy in the angels of heaven. What shall ye be obliged to do? Ye shall not have to hide on the day of the great judgment, which is coming, right? The judgment of nations. And ye shall not be found as sinners, and the eternal judgment shall be far from you for all the generations of the world. And now fear not, ye righteous, when ye see the sinners growing strong and prospering in their ways. Right now, be not companions with them. Step back from them. Forget about the world. Forget about the mystery of Babylon. Stay out of it. But keep afar from the violence. Stay out of the wars and everything. For ye shall become companions with the hosts of heaven. And the sinners, obviously, they say, we shall not be searched out or written down. They don't believe. Then unless they shall be written down every sin every day. And now unto you that light and darkness, day and night, all your you shall see all your sins. Okay, so we know that this is going to happen. Something's going to kick Egypt up against Turkey. The Ottoman Empire is going to try to come down. Iran's going to be in league with them. Libya, Sudan, they're going to come against Egypt, take it, and also Israel, and it's going to be horrific. They're going to stay out of it and judge them for wondering, what are you guys doing? The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Iran does seem like it's going to launch a nuclear weapon at Saudi Arabia, Mecca probably, and the rest of the Western world for their arrogance for trying to do the eugenics depopulation, for cutting off the poor. Because if people become poor in Europe through lack of food and fuel, obviously people are going to be starving all over these portions of the world because they have less access. So the arrogance of the West is killing everybody, all the poor in all these nations, through what they're trying to do, because they see themselves as some type. They don't see their judgment coming. They think they can get away with this for whatever reason. They don't know that they're in this paradigm. So what do we know? We're here. We're in it. 2023 seems to be the fulfillment. 2022 into 2023, be prepared for famine, skyrocketing gas prices, skyrocketing food prices, every man against another man, people, wars, civil wars, strife because of all these things that are being brought, wars in your own community, crime, lawlessness will abound, then the wars will get worse, nuclear weapons will be dropped, but stay away from, just drop pornography, drop it all, just get out of all of it, and know that the hope is in the resurrection. At the end of all this, we're going to rise again and rule the nations with Christ if we believe and we endure, knowing that this is all foretold. This is something this is not something to choose a side on the physical realm, unless somebody's going to come into your house and fight you and kill you. You got to fight, obviously, to save your family. If China somehow was involved in some invasion of the West, who knows what's going to happen really. Obviously things, you have to protect your family, but ideally stay out of it. There's nothing to fight, as far as I can tell, there's nothing any longer to fight for if these nations of the West are Mystery Babylon really performing all these things. In the end, what are you fighting for? You're fighting for transgenderism, homosexuality, abortion, the spreading of pornography. You have to really think about it. What is the West known for now? I mean, there's freedom, but even that's going away through the lockdowns and all the stuff that's been happening in the West. Really, how free are you? And then obviously Russia's, fighting, at least claiming they're fighting against that. So it's not hard to see God to use them in this situation. But what do we have to look forward to? Just to boil it all down, obviously the return of Christ, just to be ready. Time was going to eventually result in Jesus coming back, and the mystery of iniquity has been allowed to reach its height right now with the evil that's going to happen, and is happening already. Something I believe is going to happen in Ukraine, unbeneficial for the world, and it does seem like somehow Turkey's going to get involved through a NATO ally, and there's going to be a war between Turkey and Russia, which I believe is even predicted through other prophecies, through some I think Catholic or Orthodox prophecies. I'm not sure that Russia's going to fight. There's going to be a war here. It's probably going to cut off the Bosphorus Straits here from Egypt and their food, and somehow Egypt is going to get involved with trying to open it up, I think, to try to get the food supply going, but it's not going to work. It's going to only embolden Turkey, which already has plans to revitalize the Ottoman Empire, to come down, because Turkey and Iran are in a league now, so it's not hard to see them joining together in a plan like, when are we going to finally take Israel? Because even in 2021 that was almost a possibility, because it was over the Temple Mount. Gaza and Israel were going at it, and Turkey, Erdogan was being pretty bold in his declaration that you will not, the Palestinians will not be alone. And he can't really, some of those things he said, how would he go back from? It's in his head to come back, because he calls Israel a terrorist state. So that's going to result, after Egypt does its thing, it's going to be their time to move. When the Western powers really have no power, you can tell that America doesn't really have any power with how they came out of Afghanistan, with how they really aren't really willing to do anything here to help their ally in this sense. So, and China's kind of seeing that. So it's going to be Turkey's time, NATO allies, Turkey, time to come down, finally take out Assad, which is going to anger Russia even more, So it's going to come down, boom, take over that region, and dude's just going to trouble him from the north and from the east. So it seems like Russia's going to come back at him, and he's going to be enraged. He's built his tents from this, this whole region, and he's starting to lose his war here. Maybe even China's involved as Russia's ally to start breaking away at this stuff. And he's being kind of closed off, and then Christ will return at that time. And I'm thinking, honestly, from now until the end of 2023, I don't know when, I think this all going to be fulfilled. And he's going to come back, and if I'm wrong, I'm way off, and that's it. I probably shouldn't be talking about this ever again. But if it's true, and I didn't say something, and others didn't say something that are seeing this, then what help? Hopefully this video will be up. I don't think it'll be popular today or tomorrow, but I think if it's true and it starts to happen, you'll know that you're really in this paradigm, that Jesus really is the Son of God. God is, however it works, it was him in human form. He's the Word of God himself, Jesus, and by him all things are created and held together currently by that word. And he wrote it down in these various books, and he's given it to us, and history has only ever been in line with this. Obviously, Alexander to 1967, pretty big indicator that we are pretty much in that exact paradigm. And this seems to be what's going to happen to make this. Maybe there's a lull, maybe things calm down for a little bit, but I believe that this Turkish thing is going to happen, and it does seem like it's over the Black Sea because of what the West is willing to happen with the breadbasket of the Europe being cut off, and all this stuff, leading to all the famine, because the West, while this is all happening, is willing to cause its own people to suffer for their eugenics, whatever thing is going on with the virus and infusion program, which seems like pretty clear that so that you see that this is the only time in history that this could actually all be fulfilled, because Israel's back after World War II, height of evil, height of horrific things, specific nations involved, specific people in power, Al-Sisi, Erdogan, you got the Iranians, you got Putin doing its thing, a big Orthodox guy. I mean, Ottoman Empire took Constantinople, and that big, world's biggest church or whatever, that was converted into a mosque again in the, 2 years ago. I think this is it. I think Erdogan's cunning enough to be Gog, and it doesn't seem like it right now, maybe, but in a couple months, by next year, it's going to look a lot different, and things are going to move very rapidly. So just be ready. I don't know. I mean, for myself, I've gotten food, water, but just be ready spiritually. Be willing to get out of these cities if you can. If you can't, just be ready, because you'll be in the resurrection if you believe, and you believe by showing you believe through the mercy that you treat, because the Good Samaritan, be the Good Samaritan, love Christ, know that that's true. The demons are going to come. I think I've been, unless I'm mentally ill, I've been spiritually attacked pretty terrifically in the last few months, which is why I haven't made any videos. And maybe it's because I was supposed to make this, maybe not, but if this is true, then demons are going to be pretty upset because their judgment's coming. And that's why they don't want people to know this, I guess. Make sure everything's on. But just be ready. I don't see any other way yet. I mean, I've been always thinking it was 2023, but the stuff leading up to it, I haven't been so sure on. I think this is gonna do it. Bring it down. This whole Russia, Ukraine, Turkey getting involved thing. I think so. I could be wrong, and maybe Russia is involved in Gog and Magog thing, but news troubles him from the north, so I don't know. I think this is it. So that'll be it. As events happen, and if you watch this super long video, just know that it was foretold that Jesus is really the Word of God, and by him everything was created, and he really did die for the sins of man, and he is of mercy. He hates oppression. He doesn't want to see a yoke being laid on someone, even if it's a religious yoke, to make them feel like they have to get circumcised or this or that, just to be in. They believe and they walk as, like in mercy and in truth, spirit and truth, then there should not be some undue yoke on someone. So no more oppression, no more narcissism. If you can resist it, no more oppression even in the house, because he's coming back and he does not like it. So you gotta, if this is true, you're gonna know it's true pretty quick, because if 2024 rolls around and then 2025, obviously I'd be wrong, but I don't think so far this is wrong. About 2023 and the last 3 years, who can deny it? What's been going on? Everybody knows something weird's happening. It's just that, it's not that weird because it's been predicted for since the beginning, since Enoch was written before the flood, so for a long time, since the beginning. So that's all I have to say, and just if this is any value as things go on to 2022 and to 2023, like I said, just start reading these books. I just recommend, obviously, the Bible itself, the New and Old Testament, any of the apostolic fathers. So you got the Epistle of Barnabas, you got the Martyrdom of Polycarp, Shepherd of Hermas, which I believe helps understand how to be a little more, do away with some of the sinning, to know like just how it works, as opposed to going to some guy who has, just like, as opposed to going to people, because we're at the height of wickedness, right? Enoch, all the apocrypha, it's all good, because it all is pointing to the same thing, that Jesus, God created the world through Jesus Christ, through the Word, and this invasion's going to happen. Famine, all this stuff's going to get worse. Men thought they could get away with the eugenics program, abortion and all that, so just stay away from all this stuff. Do not be a part of this world anymore. And seek Christ and believe, because unless this is, I think it's true. I'm just some guy. But there's a lot of some guys out there, and maybe some God uses the foolish of us, of the world, to speak these things. So hopefully this helps you guys, and as these next 2 years unfold, and I don't know if there's much more to say. Maybe I could, as they happen, I'll kind of maybe talk about it. But I tried to put it out there in a big way, what it seems like is going to happen. Just endure and till the end.